What's up, Battletech fans? We're back with yet another edition of Battletalk, and this time we're covering Bad Mechs Part 2, because there's been lots more coming out on Sarna since then, and we got a lot to say about it. This time, though, I wanted to have just a personal one-on-one with Bishop Steiner.
Hello, hello. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I am fantastic. I am very grateful to be here. We've got a lot to talk about, and I've got some other things that we also didn't cover on the last one that I feel like we had to cut because of time constraints, things like that. Things get left on the cutting room floor. I want to explore those questions in this particular talk, and I guess I'm going to start off with one of those questions. Now, when we talked about the era of bad mechs last time, you remember that?
Yeah.
So we've established that they do exist, but what I want to know is it possible to take a later variant of a bad mech and have it be redeemed?
In my opinion, yes, unless you're one of those people who only plays in those earlier eras. I mean, you take a look at a lot of various machines and they get interesting and good upgrades. Now, sometimes they get upgrades that some consider downgrades. And considering some of the specific machines we'll talk about, I'm not going to go into details until we get to those machines. But in a lot of cases, I mean, while there were some side grades, some trade-offs, for instance, in TRO 3050, there were also some machines who were definite linear upgrades in many regards. The Archer 4N, for instance.
I love the ARC 4M. Oh my God.
It's 4M,
wonderful missile boat.
I'm just trying to remember if it's 4N, 4R, but whichever the one that I think was Merrick made, and that might have even been a retcon in, because I don't recall it from the original TR.
The ARC 4M has the two LRM-20s, but it's got Artemis on them.
Yeah, and case.
And that's
right?
and that's what I love about it.
Double heat sink. So basically,
right.
It's the 2R, but
it's the Archer that the 2R wishes it could be.
Yeah.
I still love the ARC 2R, but
it gives me jealousy because instead of all the narcs and all that crap, that's the treatment I wanted to see the ARC 2S get. Just update all its launchers with Artemis, give it case, give it double heat sinks, because it was already a ridiculously good mech for era. But apparently we had to play with stuff like deciding it was a good idea to have your LRM mech try to narc its own targets.
Right?
Because reasons.
See, and one of the things I didn't get to bring up last time that I wanted to bring up this time is when I read these articles on Sarna, which I do greatly enjoy. Let me just put that out there.
Oh, Sean does a great job with them. No doubt.
I always enjoy the stuff that they put before that from Battletopia. Just fabulous stuff. But they seem to be kind of based around a lore perspective. And that's kind of why I wanted to have this one-on-one with you, because you and I are always going back and forth on what's good lore-wise versus only what's good in mech on mech, run to the center and shoot everything.
Exactly.
But these articles, they seem to be coming, like I say, from that perspective of, well, this mech is not good anymore because these other things exist. And I feel like that's not fair to some of these things. Now, we have established, like I said, that the Charger, for example, I'm going to give you your due on this one. Fine, it's bad. The CGR 1A, the 6 small lasers. Okay. But, when you take that is not the same as, for example, one of the other mechs that they had put out recently, the Vulcan. That mech is not bad in the same way that they are presenting this other thing. The other thing is, in that vein, bad because it's standing next to something better. Well, when it was made, though, it wasn't that terrible. And I feel like for people, they can play it in those eras and still get the intended use out of those things. And so I feel like it would be more like classics or, something retro, I don't know. But I feel like to call them bad is almost like a misnomer. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, like we've discussed, there are bad mechs, but there's also misunderstood mechs. Mechs that maybe started with the bad reputation. Think the Shadowhawk. It original model had an issue where its armor plate design severed its myomers, if I remember right, in the legs, which early on gave it a bad reputation. Now, it later got redeemed to become one of the most popular and beloved mechs, despite being, from a pure mech on mech standpoint, a bit mediocre. But in all other ways, it ended up being a superior machine through iterative upgrades up to when it became the 2H. And a lot of these machines also that are bad are mechs that are a niche use mech. If you take a fire starter and try to fight your average Atlas with it, you know, you're
going to have a problem.
No battle. That's not what the mech's designed for. It will do probably badly. Now you take said fire starter and go find a nice nest of federated scum infantry.
Gee,
Suddenly it's doing its job.
about here.
But I mean, so yeah, there are degrees. There are degrees of badness in the legitimate bads, but there's also badness from misuse or misunderstanding.
Right, because that was another thing I wanted to hand you. Is, I mean, if you look behind me, the setup here, like if you take this mech and that mech, and all you're doing is just pitting them one-on-one in this duel fashion, yeah, sure, something like I just brought up the Vulcan, for example, yeah, that's probably not going to do all that great. And let's just go ahead and start, and we'll start talking about the Vulcan. One of the things I like about the Vulcan, and I don't care about the AC2, and a lot of folks will harp on me for that, but it's an AC2. Yeah, well, as you just said, when you're shooting at an Atlas, or when you're shooting at, you know, a Warhammer, and that's not that big of a deal. But when you're firing at a tank, like, that's a motive systems check. If you hit in the right spot, there's so many different spots you can hit on a tank or a VTOL that piddly little 2 damage could be instantly catastrophic.
And you
for
get
that vehicle.
It's a kill, basically, at that
yeah.
point.
But I feel like the vast majority only look at it from this dual standpoint instead of, and of course, if you shoot it at infantry, like, that's going to suck for them, unarmored infantry.
Yeah, I mean, it's not machine gun, but it has the reach. The other thing I find is a very common issue is people tend to have a bad habit of just taking the raw gross damage number of a mech and considering that the measure of its worth, which is, for instance, I'll use an example, the Hunchback real quick. The
Sure.
4P is so popular because it has all those medium lasers and it puts out more aggregate damage than a 4G
Sure.
with no explosive ammo. But they never take the time to do stuff like think about things like the motive kills or the fact that versus a mech where you don't get the motive kill, the 4P is probably actually better versus a tank than the 4G. Against
Sure.
a mech, though, what you're doing is spreading paper cuts all over the mech instead of focusing a huge 20-point clump of damage to one area.
I would rather just punch a large hole if I'm shooting at a mech.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, if you can do some crit sinking after that hole is open, fabulous. But first you got to open that hole or you won't do any crit sinking anyways.
The other thing that I think kind of gets lost in this shuffle, and it happens with another mech on this list, and I'll talk about that in a second, but the Vulcan, it's got good speed. 696 ain't terrible for that tonnage. Now,
it's very good.
It is, but even though you can't pump out, you know, a whole boatload of damage, you can still buzz around and annoy the ever-loving snot out of somebody. And you know what? The thing still kicks for 8 damage. It can still land a death from above. It can still throw 2 punches, you know, try to pop somebody's collar on a headshot. It can still jump behind somebody and fire those short-range guns. And I was just telling somebody this the other day. In 30-25, 20 damage is 20 damage. Like, however you got there. All right.
It's nailed for light armor, but 5 tons of armor in that era, or 40, because you take a look throughout TRO 30-25, people forget how few mechs have optimized maximum armor in there. A Warhammer has 10 tons, a Marauder 11.5, a Zeus and a Victor 11.5, a Cyclops 10 tons. You look at most of the other 40-tonners, I think only the Hermes 2 and the Whitworth carry more armor than 5 tons. And both of them give up on the mobility. The Hermes doesn't have the jump jets, and the Whitworth is 464.
Sure.
So, I mean, you got, like you said, good mobility, decent enough armor for era, class, and role.
I don't know how often the average person plays. I used to play, God, back in the day, and back in the day, I mean, like, just a few years ago, I was playing once a week, guaranteed, and then sometimes there would be days on those weeks where I would get in an extra game. So and this happened routinely, and then there were the games that we had on the road. I was knocking on the door of 100 games in a year, you know, for at least 2 or 3 years straight. from the late 2010s up to, just recently. And then I backed off to once every 2 weeks. And I find once every 2 weeks is great for me, but I don't know how often the average person plays. So I don't know what they're thinking when it comes to tactics or moving around and stuff like that. I don't know what's in their head. What I'm thinking when I see that Vulcan and I'm going, yeah, okay, maybe it's got weak weapons and my only enemies here are mechs. I'm going to think, well, okay, what happens on turn 7 when I'm back in the pocket? I have lost initiative. I've got big dudes coming at me down the city sidewalk and I'm in deep trouble. I need to move somebody first so I can get a movement out of them before I have to, okay, now I got to think about it again. And if I can move that Vulcan somewhere with those great jump jets around this building or up and over across the street, something like that, these are human beings playing this game. I'm taking their attention away. And people want to shoot stuff.
Especially perceived weak stuff.
Sure.
Of course, once they see the target modifiers, sometimes they rethink these choices, but
at the same time, again, my biggest thing there is it still kicks for 8 and still throws 2 4-point punches. If your weapons aren't doing a whole lot of good, that's a piloting skill roll guaranteed. You jump behind some poor sucker who's a 5 pilot, and you don't always roll a 5. I've seen plenty of 5 pilots fail on just being kicked alone with not having taken 20 points of damage.
I've had my dice betray me more times than I can count in the near 40 years I've been playing. And I totally agree with your observation. Now, I can't swear by it with all the players, but what I had noticed a lot during the last period I was able to actually play regularly at a FLGS was a trend toward very small map, very fast play, which we've seen, I think, has been one of the reasons why Alpha Strike picked up, is it allows people to basically almost treat Battletech like Magic the Gathering. You can knock out a quick match, and if you do a 4-on-4, you could probably do it in an hour, no problem.
Oh yeah, no sweat. Easy.
Maybe even half an hour if you're
if you really know what you're doing.
The smaller the map, the more people just immediately are basically Rock'em Sock'em Robot.
Sure.
And what I constantly had seen was that there was a lack of people using large map scenarios, a lack of using vehicles, infantry, optional rules, buildings, basements, etc., etc. And yeah, if you just play basically Solaris duels, any specialty mech is probably going to fail, and the Vulcan is no different. But if
do you think the Vulcan is a specialty mech?
Absolutely.
So I didn't mean to cut you off, but okay, continue.
I mean, it's absolutely a specialty. It is specifically designed as infantry, and people get this confused also. It's not anti-infantry, it's infantry support. Now, yes, that does have anti-infantry as part of it, but its primary job, that's one of the reasons why, while the AC2 fails in game mechanics, take a moment to think about the Vulcan from an in real life perspective. You have an IFV, infantry fighting vehicle, basically. Now, obviously, this is under crew carrier like those are, but your average infantry fighting vehicle will have machine guns for infantry, and they'll have a 25 or 30 millimeter Bushmaster for dealing with thin-skinned vehicles, dealing with barriers like walls, etc., etc. Now, the Vulcan has a 60 millimeter Armstrong autocannon, which is actually a lot bigger than I had thought it was. I always figured it was closer to a 40 or something, and I didn't realize it was 60. But you think about that, while we're not seeing the effect because the game rules let it down, you have a bunch of infantry behind rebar and concrete, and a high explosive 60 millimeter shell hits that wall. That whole wall has become high-speed particulate shrapnel. And we're talking about light shrapnel, like, oh, some of the casing from a grenade rained down on me from 10 feet away. No, we're talking about basically similar to what happened in the Age of Sails when a battleship fired its big cannonball and the wood splinters just buckshot at everything inside.
Sheetrock and all the metal in the walls.
If you were to think of it in that way, or in fact you hit an HE shell into a pile of sandbags, in reality, that pile of sandbags is now blown all to Kingdom Come, and you, at the very worst, have exposed infantry, if not also dead infantry from the high explosive shell. It's designed it's not even designed to fight other mechs. It's designed to stomp thin-skinned vehicles, light tanks, IFBs, and infantry, and to, by hook and by crook, whether it's using the autocannon in fluff or in gameplay, I'll probably just run it through the wall, crushing barriers where infantry's hiding. It's let down by the fact that nobody ever bothered to give deeper stats in the name of keeping the abstract and some semblance of speed to the game of Battletalk. I would swear that 90% of people play as if every map was Steiner Stadium and they were just doing a duel.
I don't know how close that is, but I feel like a lot of people do it that way, or at least that's what they look at it as. And you know what? I'm not going to hold that against them.
That's how I would say they judge things, by that scope, even if that's not directly how they play, because it always comes across as mech for damage for PV in a bubble as a single mech, instead of thinking about units, other variables, terrain, etc.
Sure. I'm not going to hold that against them, though, because I feel like that phenomenon is based on time constraints and not necessarily the mentality of the player per se. I feel like a lot of this stuff has to go down at the FLGS, and you've only got so many hours to knock this out. And that was how it used to be back in the day, where when I was running on a weekly basis, we only have from 6 to 10. So we have these 4 hours, or 5:30 to 10. We have these 5.5 hours to play, right? Or 4.5 hours, whatever it is to play. And if we don't get the game done in that amount of time, then we don't come to a satisfying conclusion, I guess. And we were playing campaigns, so the idea was to, yes, get the game done before the store closed. Or if it was a tournament game, for example, get the tournament game finished. And so...
Yeah, and totally there's things like tournaments in particular, you absolutely... You don't build a 8-map set that's going to take a 12-hour day of gaming to go through. I mean, there's the middle ground, and I also think just the video game, but also... And people will be, oh, you're knocking the generation. I don't think it's a Gen Z thing. I don't think it's a millennial thing, because I see boomers and Gen Xers like us have no real patience anymore, where we've become too used to basically instant gratification in our entertainment.
I'll give you that. So I've noticed it myself, at least in myself.
With those constraints you're talking about, and it becomes a thing. Just like, you think about how everyone looks at customization today in Battletech, and how biased that has become because of the Mech Warrior games that basically let you do anything with no restraints whatsoever. And so people literally think that, oh, most of Battletech should be custom units. And it's like, no, your table, your rules, do what you want.
Sure, I'm not going to judge
you. Rules
but...
and playing with a bunch of strangers at a con, that's not how it's going to be, probably.
So the next one on my list is the Ostscout, which is another mech I don't hate. The basis for this one was not bad reasoning. I dug it. It was because this thing was a sensor scout way back when, and it was talking about how it used to have to wave its arms around, so it looked like it was lost if somebody saw it, because it was constantly twisting and turning, and I don't know, doing the safety dance. Yeah, there you go. So, but honestly, I don't hate it, and I'll tell you why. The version of it, because of what we just talked about, how a variant in the future can redeem this thing. The one with the tag laser, you can stick that. Oh, it's an Ostscout. You can stick it in a medium fire support lance with one of the other mechs on this list, the Whitworth, Dervish, Trebuchet. Throw yourself in an Ostscout. Now you've got your spotter. You've got your tag equipped LRMs.
It's not a combat machine. And if anything, I think the medium laser was a detriment in the early version, because sometimes people would convince themselves they could fight, or they had no choice but to, instead of looking at their irreplaceable sensor array and their job and using that 8-12-8 to get the heck out of there.
I mean, even if you are thinking in the term of Rock'em Sock'em Robots, wouldn't you like to just rain down missile hate on somebody from downfield where they can't even see you?
Most people don't think on peripheral tactics. Is if Robot X does not have big guns, Robot X bad. Now think about even more so. Now, obviously, tournament rules don't currently allow for artillery, but homing munitions, for Arrow 4s. What is it? Copperhead rounds for artillery, I believe, which are the semi-guided ones Tag can help guide in. If you are playing with artillery rules, it's, here's a nice 20-point missile flying in from 5 hexes away to ruin your day while I'm still able to jump my 8-12-8. I mean, literally, only thing that I think one could argue might be slightly wrong with the design is that the tag's not placed in an arm or something where it can actually take advantage of enhanced firing arcs.
Sure.
Because it's
stuck in the center torso
while trying to retreat.
Right,
or
right.
Use your maximum mobility, like your 12 movement, if you're running, because for some reason, heat, whatever, you can't jump that turn, and you're going for a full run, you probably won't be able to lace something with the tag. Now, for me, what I wish they would do with the new Ill-Clan era is with the addition of shoulder turrets, put a shoulder turret mounted tag on one of those bad boys and a partial wing. And oh my goodness. And then you start adding Bloodhound active probes and all that other crap they got there. Oh, baby. I mean, but again, if only works if you're willing to think outside of the Rock'em Sock'em box.
But even then, and I'll bring up a tournament that I've actually been out to and covered at one of my favorite FLGSs that I've stopped at when I was going east, which is called CCYDNE. It stands for Cheap Crap You Don't Need Enterprises. It's run by the Sprout family, and we had a tournament out there. We went to cover it, and they had 6,000 battle value. And that was it. And anything, was allowed from all eras, and they had, very specific things about restrictions, and you can't use this, and this is not allowed, and it was inner sphere only. And I built, what I felt was like a pretty balanced lance, and I learned a very important lesson. I learned the problem with well-rounded, which is a topic I'll talk about in a different video, but that's when I learned that, we'll see now the format here with 6,000 battle value, you're going to get more people just trying to tweak these numbers until they scream. And I thought to myself when I got home, like, wouldn't it just seem to follow, because you would only fight on one map in this tournament. Most times you had the option of fighting on two, but I never saw anybody pick more than one. So you're already on one map.
Pretty small.
Yeah, but you're on one. And imagine you can get more battle value than a dervish if you got like an archer, a longbow, then you have your little Ostscout there, and all of the pilots in this tournament were gunnery 4, piloting 5. You had to do it that way. That was the tournament rules. So I'm like, all right, it's already super fast. You're already a horrible shot. Like, how likely are you to hit it? And so I'm thinking, if you're thinking in terms of min-max even, I'm just like, why throw this thing under the bus? Because then you can do all these tricks. This is tricks. This is stuff people don't see coming. You hide it behind a mountain. You've got 3 mechs that are throwing 120 missiles downrange, and it's this one, and they can't touch it.
Even on a 1 or 2 map, let me build that with some regulator and yellow jacket Arrow 4 variants, and that Ostscout lacing for them, or a couple Ostscouts lacing for them, because you can use those artillery missiles. You can use them on map legally in most tournaments.
That one I don't think you could, and I think it was mechs only.
But I'm using it as an example.
Sure.
You can still, in that scenario, get a lot of extremely devastating use because your regulators and yellow jackets are dirt cheap battle value.
And you paint the target, and there it goes.
And again, the Ostscout fits that kind of role naturally if you're using it there. But even in other variants, it's useful. What I have on the 3025 variant, preferred to see maybe it mount a flamer instead of a medium laser.
A flamer would be cool. I think
that would have been a lot more useful because you could smoke screen, start a forest fire.
You could blow people out of buildings that way.
Well, and when you're doing scouting in your Lost Scout mode, your biggest threat's usually actually going to be infantry.
Yeah.
And so,
like I say, you can just burn them out of that building.
Yeah. So, I mean, unfortunately, it wasn't built that way, but it would be an easy mod in universe for anyone to do. But again, it's a mech that has a very specific role, very specific niche. And if you try to use it outside of that niche, it's going to not fare well. Keep that mobility going through the roof, and it can be a very effective part of your TO&E.
Speaking of the Whitworth, that's my next on the list. That's why I was talking about tag lasers. See, that was the segue. I wanted to get into missile mechs. We got a couple of those. And the first one on my list is the Whitworth, a mech that I don't hate, a mech that I very much enjoy. I mean, for 40 tons, it's 464, but so is the Panther, and that's 5 tons lighter. And nobody calls that thing awful. Well, I'm sure a lot of people do.
The
but
beloved Davian Valkyrie's a whopping 585.
yeah,
It's half the firepower and 3/4 the armor.
and you've got 3 medium lasers in case some idiot gets up close to you. That's not a terrible punch. And then you've got your 10 racks for range.
30,
Like I say,
that's great punch. I mean, look at all the 55 tonners. How many really outgun it at short range?
I mean, shoot, if you're getting within the short range of those medium lasers, the Griffin can't shoot at you. Then you've got your Wolverine, which is
half its guns.
Yep. Your Wolverine might be able to keep pace with that.
Until you get to 3 hexes or less, and then the autocannon's out, but it's slightly higher because of the FRM6, but it's one of the exceptions to the rule.
I like the jump. I like the 3 medium lasers. The heat sinks are fine. I mean, it doesn't have enough to...
Fantastic.
That's what I was going to say. It doesn't have enough to shoot that stuff, but it has enough armor so that if it has to cycle off of something for a minute, it can risk taking that hit.
It does have enough heat sinks because for most of your LRM range bracket, your medium lasers only overlap 2 hexes.
Yeah.
So you're either firing 2 LRMs for 8 heat plus jump, so you might have to cycle off occasionally 1 or 2 guns.
I was thinking more like running
9 heat at short range. And again, even if you're jumping every time, which you probably won't because you want to increase your own accuracy too, when possible, because you have that good armor, you can afford to take the hits the Vulcan, the Assassin can't afford to take. As a fire support, I think it's a great unit. The only medium fire support mech I think does better is the Dervish.
I was just having this almost exact same conversation, so it's funny you mention it. And the conversation went somewhere along the lines of why the RFL 3D Rifleman, the Heat Miser, isn't terrible. And, he said, well, I'm not a fan of paper-thin armor, or, whatever. You could say that this thing doesn't have the armor, the Whitworth, to be a 464 and be able to say this is a good thing. Well, hold on. The same conversation that I was having was, these guys aren't meant to be getting shot at. And if they're being shot at, then there's a problem with the rest of your team because the rest of your team isn't doing their job. These things, the question, why is it being shot at? Because he said to me, well, if you can shoot at me, buddy, I can shoot at you. Yeah, but why? Why would you be doing that? The rest of my team is going to make it a priority for you to want to shoot them. And if they're not doing that,
remember our previous conversation on the Jaeger mech was very similar.
Yep.
If you're sitting back there with your 2 LRM-10s at 18 to 20 hexes away, and you have your rest of your lance screening, the only thing that's likely for anyone who's smart to be shooting at the Whitworth might be if a light mech is trying to flank it. At which point it has more than enough armor, and its 3 medium lasers outgun the vast majority of light mechs, and it has twice the armor of, say, a Jenner, which would be one of the most dangerous mechs coming after it. But also, let's remember one thing. We're looking at these mechs, and having 8 tons of armor on a 464 isn't ideal if it's facing off against a Thunderbolt or a Warhammer.
No.
But what are the vast majority? 70% of all mechs in that era are other mediums or lights. Very seldom are you running across and going toe-to-toe with heavies on a regular basis, unless you're in Zeta Battalion, because oddly they do have a Whitworth in their Tioni and the Wolf's Dragoon source book.
How about that?
I can understand the 1 or 2 hunchbacks they have. The Whitworth kind of confuses me, but that's another story for another discussion. But against anything up to 50-ish tons, 8 tons of armor is decent. Its firepower is solid at all ranges, like you mentioned. And against lighter units, it's absolutely a devastating machine.
And if somebody were to say to me, well, when I peel my light mech off and go running up the side of the board so I can flank him, I don't know. The first thought I think is, okay, so what you've told me is you're going to take another mech away from the guys I'm downfield beating on.
So now I see you're coming to me, so you're now my focus of fire.
Sure.
Chances are, because almost any mech that's fast enough to do the flank will have no long-range weapons, so I'll probably get 1 to 2 rounds of unanswered fires with both LRM-10 racks. And most of those mechs are 4 tons, 4.5 tons of armor tops. So even 2 solid hits from those LRMs can start doing some real damage. And then when you get into range, I have 3 medium lasers on top of that. And if you happen to hit the Goldilocks zone, you're going to absolutely be willing to run a little heat and fire all 5 guns on an incoming Jenner or other mech coming after you.
Jenner was the first thing in my head.
And say, well, I'll run a Jenner F with its 7,000 armor. Maybe, but again, that's when we're looking at perspective of taking the game out of just being Rock'em Sock'em Robot and looking at perspective. Jenners, for one thing, were not that common, especially outside of the Draconis Combine.
Right.
Because the factory was destroyed in the first succession war, if memory serves. And so they were a dwindling supply by third succession war. Jenner Fs were an exceedingly uncommon variant of the base Jenner, with the 4 medium laser, takes the SRM4 for the extra armor. So it's not like you're running into a unit of, I have a company of Jenner Fs. Okay, in your min-max play, alternate universe play pretend, sure, the rules let you do that. And the actual Battletech universe as written, that's not a scenario you're ever going to run into. And the other thing, when you run by to flank to get to my Whitworth, you're telling me your Hunchback or Thunderbolt or whatever that's at that isn't going to take a shot of opportunity at its butt, at its rear armor as it goes by? I absolutely will. Unless
I'll try it if I can make that shot.
Or something, you know.
I might even do it then if it's an energy weapon.
Yeah, and depending on what the status of the battle in front of me is doing. But yeah, you're almost always going to focus. A smart person will look at the numbers and go, okay, I've got a Thunderbolt and a Hunchback 6 hexes away from my battle line that I need 4s, 5s, or 6s to hit. Or there's this one little mech lobbing LRMs 20 hexes back that I need an 8 or a 10 to hit.
Right. Yeah, you're going to go with the stuff you can hit all the time.
And most the stuff that's in imminent threat of putting an
in your face.
In your face.
Yeah.
Because they also have a better chance, honestly, at that range of hitting you. But also, as that Jenner closes, Battletech accuracy is based on range brackets. You're going to be in your medium range before the Jenner's ever in range to start using its long range on its medium lasers and SRM4.
Shucks, you might even be able to plot your way into being in short range for 1, maybe 2 shots.
Correct. And at best, and like if you hit the Goldilocks zone, it's going to still be at long range for its lasers, where you're firing at medium range ish.
7 is short, so you'd be 8 to 14.
Medium on your LRMs and then long on your medium lasers. So yeah, you got that. I mean, people do so much on this what if and gotchas, but they also forget there's one thing. Whether you're talking Battletech, real warfare, anything, it's always a game of rock, paper, scissors. There's always a counter to everything. So yes, you can potentially kill my Whitworth.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say that I was thinking you said Magic the Gathering earlier, talking about that. It's the same thing there, just like it is here, where you can take any card, any mech, whatever. And if you're trying to build a list that specifically counters that one thing, yeah, of course, you're going to find something that can beat it.
Numerically, playing the odds, like when I kind of crapped on you on one of our other conversations on crit seeking, if you're really doing the maths,
I stand by that.
More times than not, you're not going to get that perfect opportunity to flank and kill that Whitworth if used correctly. Now, if you're foolish and you bring your Whitworths and Jaeger mechs and bring them up into medium and close range and blah, 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 and make them an obvious target because of their thin armors compared to some of the other machines you might have, then yes, you're going to lose them. Most people, I find, don't have the patience, and a lot, honestly, I mean, even the best Battletech players, we're not really talking about any of us. I'm not Patton. I'm not Rommel.
I'm definitely not.
You know, some
any of those guys.
Genius,
no.
You know, and have never, to be honest, in 40 years of playing, even at tournaments and conventions, I've never encountered a true tactical genius playing Battletech either. And so I think some of that plays in. And to be honest, more people probably fall into the run toward the middle and start kicking and scrapping mentality than not. And so they just don't grasp any tactic that doesn't fit their desired playstyle.
If you're gonna run to the middle of the map and fire a bunch of stuff, I feel like the next mech on my list, the Gintaro, King of Missiletown.
Ideal.
Yeah, how is it bad? Like if dueling is your thing, not dueling, but one-on-one fights or whatever, 4-on-4 battles in the city or in an open field or whatever. I mean, it's got speed, 5'8". It's got the short-range missiles, death by 1,000 paper cuts.
2 issues with the Gintaro.
Okay.
One, the current art for it looks like a robo-chimp. It's just really ugly.
Okay.
And just like to the point of stupid looking, in my opinion. So it always annoyed me how dumb it looked.
I'm gonna have to go look at this now. Like the new art?
We don't have new art for it yet. I
didn't think so.
But I'm talking about like TRO 2750 or the 3039 update for the artist.
Yeah, where it looks like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme where he's walking and doesn't care. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And then one of my complaints with the Grasshopper, I pretty much hate any mech over 20 tons that has a single LRM-5.
Oh, you hate the Vindicator too?
Honestly, the Vindicator, the one thing that holds it back from being a top tier mech, is it had an SRM-4 instead of the LRM-5, it would be 10 times more useful as a mech, because the LRM-5, a single LRM, yes, people can talk, leave minefields when you're in the right tech era, but even those minefields are pretty damn pathetic from an LRM-5. I mean, it's more panacea than effectiveness to have a single LRM-5 on any mech over 20 ton. I just... That always annoyed the crap out of me. Imagine taking those 3 tons for 3 heat sinks on a Gintaro. And how much of a difference that would make, considering the biggest drawback to the Gintaro really, it has 2 real drawbacks technically. No real long-range firepower, and it's hot.
Yeah.
It can get very hot.
That's one of the things I don't like about it.
And so, get rid of the piddly LRM-5 for 3 heat sinks.
Yeah, now you're in business.
You remove the fanciful, I have long-range firepower. No, you don't. You never did. Just get over it.
Damn.
Okay. But now you have better heat endurance for what you're actually doing, which also gives you more impetus to do what it's designed to do, which is get in somebody's face and start barraging SRMs into it.
Sure. And then, kick in or, punching and things, physical attacks, that kind of thing.
You either have to, for me, my outlook is mechs are in 3 categories. Well-designed mechs. Mechs with actual good, solid long-range firepowers. Awesomes, longbows, archers, your long-range pummelers.
Sure.
Mechs that are good, solid all-around mechs. Thunderbolt, for instance. Crusaders until somebody sneezes on their ammo and they explode. It's the thought that counts.
No lies detected.
Or mechs that are all short-range and fast enough and tough enough to take advantage of that. I mean, really, the only thing I would say that would make a Gintaro better is if it was 6'9".
This is an outrage!
Yeah.
No, the Gintaro being 6'9" would make it Bossa Nova. That would be, really good.
It would be Stormcrow, almost Stormcrow level good at that point. Because the biggest thing that makes a Stormcrow so deadly, it has good armor and firepower, yes, but it's that speed to get in and out and slash.
Yeah.
5'8", though, is still pretty damn solid, and unlike most of the other 5'8ers, 5'8", 55 tonners, I should say,
right?
It really punishes you. Yes, it drops the jump jets to be able to do that, but you let a Gintaro get close, you're going to remember it.
And if you take your eye off that ball, I guarantee you will live to regret it when it gets into that right position to drop 3 SRM-6s on you. That sucks.
It's one of the mechs. My ideal use for a Gintaro, if you have one, is to hunt trooper mechs. Your Centurions, your Enforcers, your Vindicators. Yeah. Because you get up and close, it outguns pretty much all of them. And it has the speed to do it, and it has better armor. Now, trooper mechs are great all-around units. I love them. Centurion's one of my all-time favorite mechs.
Sure.
But you get a Gintaro 6 hexes away from you in a CN9A, you're having a bad day.
Yeah, but you're gonna take some punishment there for sure.
You have at that point, you have an AC-10 and a medium
10 cannon and a medium laser, yep.
And 8.5 tons of armor versus 11.5, I want to say.
I would probably see the closer you get within that minimum range, the worse it gets. I would take the shot at 6. 5 is when I start thinking about it. 4 is when I go, no, okay. 4 is too close. 5, I'll say I'm treating this like a medium range shot. It's the same as medium range. I could probably make that. But anything closer than that, and I'll go,
but
nope,
that's still,
I'm good.
On average, at best, you're hitting with 6 LRMs on top of that.
Right.
Versus a mech with, what, 2 SRM6s, 2 or 3 medium lasers?
I believe it has 2 medium lasers.
Okay,
1 in each arm.
Yeah, and 2 SRM6s?
KTO-18 has 3 SRM6s.
Okay. Now, admittedly, AC-10 is putting 10 damage in one area, whereas SRMs are putting crap everywhere. It's like,
right,
missile bukkake, but but overall, especially when you look at something like Centurion or the Enforcers, a lot of them have bad side torso armor for their weight comparatively. The 11 tons of standard armor.
All right.
So,
and that's versus what?
8.5 tons of armor on the Centurion, and I want to say only like 12 armor on the side torsos or some such.
You are looking at 13 on the side torsos.
All right. 16
in the legs, 16
and
in the arms.
A nice packet of ammunition in each side torso on the Centurion.
Yep, you've got the LRM ammo in the left torso, 2 tons, and then 2 tons of AC ammo in the right, and the right torso will be easier to hit because you've only got the 1 heat sink in there to pad it. Otherwise, it's the only other thing in there.
Yeah.
And you get into the back there, you've only got 6 points of armor in the side torsos. Getting in there wouldn't be terribly hard. No. A medium laser and a missile would do it,
but
and
you give
6
me a
is fairly
with 4
common.
tons of side torso armor, minimal padding, 13 points of armor protection versus a mech spamming 3 SRM6s into you constantly.
At least every other turn. Because that's 4, 8, 12, 13, 14. You go to 4 heat for doing that, so you would have to cycle back on them.
Still not going to be a pretty day in my similar scenario. Not as brutal with the ammo and stuff, but Enforcer, slightly better armor, 9.5 tons. But
I was going to say the Enforcer is my trooper mech choice.
Yeah,
that's
run out of ammo in 10 turns.
Well, true. I mean, if you're going for long-term gameplay, yeah, you're right. The short-term games that I'm used to playing, so many times I'll tell people, just go ahead and shoot the gun. The game ain't going 20 turns, man. It ain't. you could do it.
See, I'm the guy that had the notorious Assassin versus Griffin match that lasted around 50 turns. So
yes.
I guess I am too patient and play too much the long game, and I'm just thinking, I love the Enforcer, don't get me wrong, but I always was a little sad by the back armor and the lack of a second ton of ammo.
That's fair. I'm not going to begrudge you those. So I think, honestly, at the end of the day, the takeaway here for me is that maybe not every mech is great for every single situation, but I still think that most mechs, not all of them, because again, we have shown, we have shown there are bad mechs, but I think that each of these things is just a tool that sits on a shelf until you need it for that specific reason, whatever that specific reason is. And if you never need it for that specific reason, then you might see that tool as useless or not worth your time or something like that. But when you are needing something that can gun down infantry or set buildings on fire, you might be looking at things like the Vulcan or the Firestarter and having maybe just a little bit difference of opinion on them at that point. Do you agree with that?
I do. I also think sometimes people need to step outside their comfort zone, because I used to, for instance, I believe I told you the story of, I used to think the Assassin was crap.
Right.
Then I ended up, because I'm still one of those guys, I love using the rats, and I rolled an Assassin, so I had to roll with it. And I realized I could either just be I'm going to sulk and just run and get my mech killed and then roll up a new one.
Sure.
Or I could try to figure something out to do with it. And then I killed a Griffin in my first duel using the thing, even if it took 4 hours. So it's sometimes people just really need to be willing to stop coming in with these preconceived ideas of it's a binary thing.
Sure.
It gives stuff a chance to try something different. And you might be surprised by this stuff. And sometimes even if it's still not optimal, you might have just realized, you know what? I had to work a lot harder for that win. was actually kind of fun.
But that's what makes it so satisfying. Or you have those cool stories where you took something and you thought it was garbo, and they were just beating the snot out of it, and they were throwing everything they had, and no matter what they tried, they still couldn't take this stupid thing down. And you were able to pull out the win, and it just becomes one of those memorable things.
Exactly. So, yeah, I'm with that mind is, yes, the number of truly bad mechs is relatively small. Yes, they exist, but again, small. But even so, they add flavor to the game.
Oh, sure.
And the not bad mechs, what I believe are, and I think Chris also called it that, the suboptimal mechs,
right?
Again,
suboptimal
also add flavor to the game,
and they help teach you what is and isn't good.
And to my outlook is the game is so much more boring. Anytime I've ever played like a game where it's all optimized min-max stuff, it's usually the most paint drying, grass growing, boring matches I've ever played.
I know exactly what you mean.
Whereas when I see people having to try to get creative, stuff that ain't great, it's almost always turned into some of the most fun and memorable matches I've had.
And that is what makes Battletech so great, is that human element where, yeah, they're robots, but there is a flesh and blood person in this thing, and you never know what humans are going to do until they do it. Folks, that has been Battletalk 39. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you've seen so far, do us a big favor. Hit that subscribe bell down there and turn on all notifications so you can find out exactly where Battlebound's going to turn up next. Don't forget to subscribe to Bishop's Patreon. It's patreon.com/Bishop Steiner. It just came to my mind right then and there. Ours is patreon.com/Battlebound. Do yourself a big favor. Sign up for both today and reap those benefits tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on Battletalk. For myself and my guest, Bishop Steiner, we bid you a fond farewell, and we'll see you next time right here on the Space Lanes.
Peace out.
Be sure to smash our like button and subscribe to our channel.
Crowdfunding is when lots of people give you small amounts of money to help your passion project come to life.